The neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate brochure. White fences, trimmed lawns, cars washed to a shine, and an HOA that promised peaceful community living. But behind those neat facades lurked something darker. Power, control, and one woman who thrived on both. Karen wasn't just a resident. She was the president of the HOA, the self-proclaimed guardian of order. To most, she was just a nosy neighbor with too much time. But to the people who lived under her rules, she was a nightmare wearing a polite smile. She memorized every clause, every bylaw, every tiny detail she could weaponize. And if you ever broke one, she'd come for you with fines, letters, and shame. For years, no one stood up to her. People paid their fines, apologized for things they didn't do, and hoped she'd leave them alone. But power feeds on fear, and Karen fed well. Until one man moved in, Mark. Mark wasn't the kind of neighbor who caused trouble. He kept to himself, worked from home, and spent his weekends fixing up his place. But Karen noticed him the day he arrived. His fence was wooden, not vinyl like the others. His mailbox had an old bronze finish instead of standard white. And he didn't show up to her mandatory HOA meet and greet brunch. That's all it took for her to label him a problem. A week later, Mark found his first notice taped to his door. Violation #103A. Non-standard fence material. He read it twice, confused. He checked the bylaws, wood fences were still allowed. But when he brought that up to Karen, she smiled like a teacher correcting a student. The board is revising the guidelines, she said. You'll need to comply within 30 days. Seemed minor. He figured she'd lose interest. But Karen didn't lose interest, she escalated. A second notice arrived. Mailbox non-compliant. Then another for improper lawn edging. Soon, fines started stacking up. $50, $100, $250. Every time Mark tried to discuss it, she cut him off with the same words. You agreed to the HOA rules when you moved here. He paid a few fines just to keep the peace, but she didn't want peace. She wanted submission. She loved watching him bend, and every dollar he paid, every repair he made, only fed her belief that she could control him. Neighbors started whispering about her obsession. She'd drive by his house late at night, flashlight in hand, inspecting his property line. She'd take photos, send emails, even measure the length of his grass. When Mark's security cameras caught her sneaking onto his property, he sent her a polite warning. She replied with a fine for having unapproved surveillance equipment visible from the street. That's when he knew she wasn't just strict. She was dangerous. Mark wasn't some naive homeowner. He had a background in real estate law. He'd seen HOAs abuse power before and he knew how to fight them. But this time he didn't fight back right away. Instead, he watched, listened, waited. Every notice she sent, he filed away. Every email she wrote, every board meeting agenda, every budget report, he saved them all. And he noticed something strange. The HOA's maintenance fund was shrinking fast. Karen had been authorizing payments to consultants, companies no one had ever heard of. The invoices all had her signature. He started digging deeper. He attended board meetings quietly, sitting in the back, saying nothing. He watched as Karen dominated every vote, shut down dissent, and rewrote bylaws on the fly. She controlled the minutes, the finances, and even the elections. It wasn't just about lawns and mailboxes anymore, it was about money. While Karen flaunted her power, Mark built his case. He cross-checked financial records, recorded her statements, but he needed one thing more, proof of intent. Karen gave it to him herself. One morning, he found a letter in his mailbox marked, Final Notice. It said the HOA had voted unanimously to foreclose on his property, due to unpaid fines totaling $12,480. Mark smiled. He had paid every one. And he had the receipts. But the money hadn't gone into the HOA account. It had gone straight to an unlisted bank account under the name K.J. Holdings LLC. Karen's name. That was her mistake. He didn't confront her. He didn't even respond. He just stopped appearing around the neighborhood. Weeks passed. The street felt quiet without him. Karen, proud of her victory, bragged at the next HOA meeting about removing another non-compliant homeowner. But that night, An envelope appeared on her porch. No name, no return address, just a single USB drive and a note that said, "Check the bylaws, President." Inside that drive was everything. Years of her own emails, recordings of her statements, documents showing misused HOA funds, and screenshots of her fake company payments. Mark had turned her own paper trail into a weapon. But the worst part? He hadn't just sent it to her. Copies went to every homeowner, the state HOA regulatory office, and the county district attorney. Within days, everything unraveled. Residents were furious. They demanded an emergency meeting. Karen tried to calm them, insisting it was all fabricated. But when the state investigators showed up with copies of her bank transactions, her words fell apart. She tried to blame others, the treasurer, the secretary, but her own signature was everywhere. News spread fast. The woman who once fined people for having trash cans out too long was now being accused of embezzling tens of thousands of dollars. Her confidence cracked, her voice shaking as she tried to explain. The neighbors she'd terrorized for years stood silent, watching her squirm. For years, Karen had built a kingdom of rules and punishments. But those same rules now became her prison. Every bylaw she twisted, every fine she abused, every signature she forged, they all came back to her like ghosts. When investigators uncovered the fraudulent foreclosure notices, they moved fast. Police cars rolled into the neighborhood early one morning, lights flashing quietly against the perfect lawns. The same houses that had once feared her now watched as officers walked up her driveway. Karen answered the door in her robe, trying to act surprised. But the look on her face told the truth. She knew it was over. They read her the charges: fraud, falsifying records, embezzlement, and escorted her out as cameras clicked. The neighbors didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just stood there, stunned, realizing the nightmare was finally over. Mark returned a few days later. Calm, quiet, same as before. People thanked him, offered to make him president of the HOA, but he refused. He'd never wanted power, he wanted balance. He helped them elect a new board, one built on transparency and trust. The bylaws were rewritten to prevent any single person from controlling everything again. Months later, Karen's house went up for sale. Her name became a punchline at neighborhood barbecues, a warning whispered among the residents. Don't cross the line between leadership and dictatorship. One evening, Mark walked down the same street that once felt hostile and cold. Kids played outside again. Neighbors smiled and waved. The fear was gone. He stopped by his fence. The same wooden one Karen had called non-compliant still stood strong, untouched, perfectly fine. He ran his hand along the wood, remembering everything. How she tried to break him, humiliate him, destroy him. But in the end, she'd only exposed herself. Karen's downfall wasn't the result of one man's revenge. It was her own arrogance, her own greed, her own obsession with control that led her there. She'd built a system of traps, and then forgot where she placed them. Now her legacy was gone. The perfect neighborhood she once ruled lived on without her. And somewhere far away, in a courthouse file, her name sat stamped in red ink. Case closed. The world kept spinning. Lawns kept growing. Fences stood tall. But for the people who lived there, one truth remained clear. You can build walls, you can write rules, you can demand obedience, but when you weaponize control, control will destroy you in return. And that's exactly how HOA Karen's demands led to her own downfall. Caught in the very trap she built for everyone else. Because in the end, justice doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently, watching, recording, waiting for the moment when those who think they're untouchable finally touch the fire they started. And when they do, there's no one left to save them from the burn. Karen learned that the hard way.